Good evening and welcome to our ReggieCon panel discussing Black Panther and Blackjack Team Up. We have a number of special guests with us tonight and you will meet all of them soon. And we're thrilled to have you join us for our second year of ReggieCon at Illinois State University and our fifth ReggieCon panel of the 2021-22 academic year. My name is Amelia Noel Elkins and I am the Interim Assistant Vice President for Student Success at Illinois State. And we are thrilled tonight to join in the celebration of Black History Month through this conversation. Before we begin the panel, just a few details to keep everything running smoothly for all of you in the audience. Please know that this session is being recorded and will be archived on the ReggieCon website. Also, if you need confirmation that you attended tonight's ReggieCon event, we will post a link to a form for you to submit a request for confirmation of attendance. While the presenters' video and audio are on, we cannot hear or see any guests. However, we will be monitoring the Q&A function, so we encourage you to ask questions of the presenters. After some initial discussion, our panelists will be taking questions from the attendees. At the ReggieCon website, you can find recordings of previous panels and information about ReggieCon panels for the remainder of the 2021-22 academic year. And our hope is that in the spring, we'll be able to host a live event for ReggieCon. Keep checking the website for updates. At this time, I am pleased to introduce our moderator and panelist for the discussion of Black Panther and Blackjack Team Up, Dr. Scott Jordan, who is a professor of psychology and the chair of the psychology department here at Illinois State University. Scott, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Amelia, and welcome everyone to ReggieCon, the con that asks the question, what's your story? I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher here at Illinois State University. And tonight we come together to celebrate Black History Month with a discussion of what we refer to as a Black Panther Blackjack team up. Now we've chosen this name because many of tonight's panelists have collaborated on many Comic-Con panels regarding the past, present, and future of Wakanda's Black Panther. In addition, our special guest for this evening, Inkpot award-winning creator, Mr. Alex Simmons, has also participated in many of these Black Panther conversations with us. So tonight we're all going to come together and we're going to focus on his amazing graphic novel, Blackjack, Second Bite of the Cobra. And I'm certain that as we do so, character of the Black Panther will make his way into our conversation. So before we begin, I just want to take a moment to thank those people who make this all possible. Dr. Amelia Noel Elkins, whom you just met, Dr. Jana Albrecht, Mr. Sean Thornton, who does all of the amazing artwork for ReggieCon, Miss Danny Schroeder, and Miss Summer Simpsons. Thanks to you for making us look like we know what we're doing. So now, to introduce tonight's panel, we'll begin with that motley crew of comic and pop culture aficionados, purveyors of all things geekdom, the ReggieCon crew. First, the hardest working man in comics, Mr. Victor Dandridge Jr. Victor, please come on in and tell the audience a little something about who you are.
Well, as you said, I am the hardest working man in comics. I'm a phenomenological narratologist, self-publishing comic creator, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, tuning in from Chicago. So everyone that's used to my normal setup, that's why it's so very different. But it's an absolute pleasure to be here and can't wait to get into this conversation.
Fantastic. Also on the ReggieCon crew, the organizer of the Latin X Comics Festival, Dr. Teresa Rojas. Teresa, please come on in and tell the audience a little something about who you are.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Teresa Rojas. I'm very excited to be here. I am a professor of English and also the first professor of ethnic studies at Modesto Junior College in beautiful but currently a little chilly Modesto, California, in the Central Valley of California. And I also direct the Latinx Comic Arts Festival, which is coming back live. I'm so excited about this, March 25th and 26th here in Modesto.
Fantastic. Also on the ReggieCon crew, my colleague and partner in crime and all things nerdy, Dr. Eric Wesselman. Eric, please come on in and tell the audience a little something about who you are.
Hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Interesting.
Eric's going phantom on us this evening.
Yes.
Right.
I've studied social invisibility so much that I apparently have become invisible.
There you
It's a
go.
little too parasocial there, man.
There you go. So I'm Dr. Eric Wesselman, and I'm a social psychology professor here at Illinois State University. In addition to studying the dynamics of social inclusion and exclusion, I love using comics, film, pop culture narratives to teach, and I'm excited to hear the discussion tonight.
Excellent. And now to introduce tonight's guest panelists, dear friends, Dr. Vanessa Hintz and Dr. Stanford, both of whom have done many Black Panther Comic-Con panels with us. Vanessa, please come in and tell the audience a little something about who you are.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good afternoon, good day, good evening. Everyone, my name is Vanessa Hintz. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist in the Milwaukee, Wisconsin area. Also a Black geek, a Black nerd, a lover of all things pop culture. And I'm very excited to get into this conversation as well. So thank you for having me.
No, we're so glad you're here. And Stanford, would you please come on in and tell everybody a little something about who you are?
Hello, I'm Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I am a cultural anthropologist coming to you out of Chicago, Illinois. I'm an anthropologist, and I'm also chair of the Black and Brown Comic Arts Festival. And I do lots of fun stuff with museums.
It's fantastic. Just a second here. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's very special guest, Mr. Alex Simmons. Mr. Alex Simmons is an award-winning freelance writer, educator, creator of comic books, screenplays, and stage plays. In 2017, he received the Comic-Con International Inkpot Award, which is given to individuals for their contributions to the worlds of comics, science fiction, fantasy, film, television, animation, and fandom services. For DC Comics, he has produced such notable titles as Batman Orpheus, Archie and Friends, and Scooby-Doo. He's also written a slew of children's books, including The Revel League, Sherlock Holmes is Missing. He wrote 12 interactive multi-level mysteries for the award-winning game for Tiger Toys, Who Done It? Samples of his writing for theater and radio include Sherlock Holmes and the Hands of Othello, produced off-Broadway, and also an audio play produced by Dark Angel Productions, as well as My Interview with Deadwood Dick, starring Morgan Freeman, an audio play produced by Dark Angel Productions. He also provides a wide variety of workshops, such as Bronx Community Crime Scene Investigation, an interactive interdisciplinary science program for the Bronx Community College STEP series. He has traveled all over the world, just like his character Blackjack, including this visit to Russia. He is also very well known for his creation of the Kids Comic-Con, a comic book convention geared towards kids and enhancing their love for the medium. And he is also a contributor to the Color of Comics exhibition organized by Bronx Community College and Kids Comic-Con. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alex Simmons.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I don't have to introduce myself now because you have some idea of who I am.
There you go. Well, we're absolutely thrilled to have you here.
Thank you.
If what I think I'll just do quickly is, because we're going to focus tonight's conversation on Blackjack, Second Bite of the Cobra, I'm quite certain, as I said earlier, that other issues will emerge as we discuss. So the first thing I just want to ask, give you a bit to talk about what it was like to create the Blackjack character, what you went through trying to publish it, and what's happened to your career since you published Blackjack.
Yeah, I'm weird. Okay. Yeah, that's just, let me just start with that, Victor, so you don't get to say it later. Okay, so the shortest way I can do this is, my mom's raised me. I'm the product of a single parent, and my mother had health issues, but she's a sweetheart, and believe me, most tolerant human being on the planet, because she had me as a kid, to look after. But I had a wild imagination. I like to watch a lot of television. I read comics, and I was reading adventure books and mystery books. Sherlock Holmes was a big influence in my life. Batman was a big influence in my life. And so a lot of what I was absorbing growing up was adventure stories and mystery stories and globe trotting and all those, fantastic possibilities for excitement and discovery. I didn't see anybody with the same skin color as myself doing that, unless we went to Africa and then there was this white guy yelling, but that's a whole nother story. So the bottom line was, I didn't see myself as it not being possible to be an adventurer and a detective and all those things. I just didn't see a replication or a reflection of myself in those particular films. But I grew up with that urge. So I started out, when I got out of high school, I started pursuing acting, and I did acting in theater and extra work in films and things like that, and voiceover work for a number of years. But also it was the early 70s, early to mid 70s, and the roles for Black men as actors were either they were doing Sounders and stories about us on the plantation, or they were doing Angry Black Man across 110th Street. And all of the roles and the possibilities and the adventurers and the inventors, none of that was showing up on screen. So I started writing material for myself to perform, and that led to me eventually writing the Sherlock Holmes play, Sherlock Holmes in the Hands of Othello. There's a longer story to that, but I wrote that with the intention of performing in it. And the more I did readings of the play, the more I realized I had to be the writer. I couldn't be an actor, waiting to get on stage. I had to serve the story. So that led to me doing more writing, which led to me doing more research. And I started discovering that the things that I had imagined were possible, that people who look like me could have done those things, really did do those things. And so that, over a period of years, developed into, by the 80s, I had conjured up the character of Blackjack. I did more research to solidify the possibilities, but I still had the adventures in my head. I saw this person being less of the type of stereotype that was being presented of now strong Black men, which was, pardon me for this. The images at that time was we were very successful with the ladies. Let me put it that way. And also our language and our vocabulary was limited to a plethora of 4-letter words. Oh, and we could shoot things. So I decided, yeah, my character could fight and he could shoot and he could ride and he could do all that stuff, but he wasn't going to curse, not once. And that he was going to struggle with being who he was, the kind of man he was during the 1930s, being a Black man trying to establish his identity and to show his value as a human being, but in the 1930s, or the dirty 30s, as some people like to refer to them, when the prejudice that we experience now was multiplied 10 or 20 or 30 fold. So to me, it was my way of saying, we have done, we are doing, the future is ours as well. And here's some proof, as well as some fun and adventure to help you see that. And to quickly say, what was it like trying to get that out into the public? It was turned down quite a bit because either it was a Black lead or the women weren't undressed enough. There was a couple of other little things in there. And so slowly but surely, I found people with some cash and they said, yeah, we'll back you. And I've self-published the thing. And the end of that particular end of the story was there was a distributor who said, well, I don't think we can really sell these. I mean, we don't handle Watts or Bed-Stuy. So, and that's where your audience would be. And I was fortunately at a convention at the time he was saying this idiotic thing. And I was carrying 3 cases of comics over to a distributor who was doing the exact opposite of this guy all throughout the Midwest. So I was able to point that out to him. And then I also said, by the way, I've been getting some fan mail over this new thing called email. And it's from Europe and Copenhagen. So tell me, where are the brothers hanging out in Copenhagen? And that's it. That's pretty much the experience. There's some other stories, but that's pretty much the experience.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. So to make sure we get into the spirit of Blackjack, Second Bite of the Cobra, I've asked the panelists to pick a favorite frame, favorite panel. They're going to share that with you, tell you why they love it so much, and then the rest of us are going to riff on that. And then we'll go to the next panel and see how we move on. So the first panel, the first person's panel will discuss his victors. Victor sent me two, so Victor, let me know if you want me to show both of them.
Actually, you do, but it's all about the lead into presentation. And this is literally how this book starts. And immediately I was taken by this. A lot of times when we have these conversations, we're actually talking to a lot of people who are making comics almost as a lark, almost as an experiment, because they have a story that they want to tell. They think comics will do a good job of telling that story. It's only a handful of times that we've actually had someone on that tells a comic story with purpose of knowing what comics can do when it comes to story. And Alex, obviously, as the writer, is the first hand that kind of guides that action into happening. And this first sequence of 3 pages, because it's the first page and the spread of 2 and 3 that just grab you. I was a kid of the early 90s when I was getting into comics, and this would have had me. I would have been an immediate comic book reader off of this sequence. What we're seeing is a combination of setup of the overall story. We're seeing visual narration that is intriguing. It brings you in. There's so many cool things that are just done right. Like on every level, it's interesting. It's familiar without seeming like it's derivative. There's so many things that are just absolutely the coolest. And I, like, from the moment I started these pages, I was like, yep, this is going to be it. I don't know if there's anything that can top this feeling that I have, but this is when comics are done right. And again, this is not even just, the pictures, but the lettering, the framework of the captions and all the things. Like, it's such a cool showcase of style, story genre, feel, mood, everything. And it's perfectly done. I loved this immediately.
One of my favorite things about this frame, the spread that we're looking at, is the silhouette. I think that the action in the foreground is super powerful, but the silhouette just really makes it pop so much more, and there's so much going on there. So we don't just have the main action, but we have this very dynamic background action. And then also for me, the narrative boxes, the scroll, the very fancy scrolls that we get, they get a little more simple, or not simple, but they're simplified later on in the comic. But I like how they're very sort of fancy and burnt around the edges in this. But that silhouette is what really grabs me about this spread.
Very cool.
Yeah, we've talked before, and Alex, I know that one of your favorite movies is The Time Machine, and the sense of time, the sense of era, and with the writing, with the leaf texts, that the leaf boxes that the texts are in and such, I immediately felt myself as if I were watching The Time Machine, Lawrence of Arabia, one of these fantastic, large scope kind of experiences, and truly understood what you meant when you talk about why you wrote Blackjack.
Thank you. It's funny, I got to give a hats off to a great team, a phenomenal team. It was Joe Bennett was the illustrator on this, who did pencils and inks. And the letterer was Ken Brusnak, who I particularly chased down and pleaded with, because Ken did his lettering by hand, by the way, to fit whatever the style, era, and mood was of a particular comic that he was working on. So he brought his artistry to the page. And then the coloring was by James Brown, the godfather of color. So a little short guy in Boston, who not only talked a good talk when I interviewed him, but watched a slew of 30s films to develop a palette so that he knew what colors to bring to the page. So really the success of that book has a lot to do with the marvelous team of people I had the opportunity to work with. And also let me include in there Liz Sheehan, an old high school friend, who designed the logo and a lot of the other pages in terms of the editorial pages. And my editor, which was Bill McKay, which is another person who just brought, he's a wealth of historical knowledge. So anything I hadn't researched, he would go, well, the Crimean War on this particular date. And so, like I said, I had a marvelous, marvelous team to work with.
It definitely shows.
Now, Let's say hello to Eric. He's here in true spirit.
We can see him now.
Yay!
I do exist. I swear.
Yes.
Excellent.
Not clouding our minds. Okay, thank you.
So I think the next image we'll go to is Teresa's. Teresa, if you want to describe what we're seeing.
Yeah, so okay, so I love this spread because I sort of love to hate this spread because I guiltily love this spread. And what I want to say about before I talk about this is that my focal point for this and for my feelings, my deep feelings about this spread are Miriam and her role in this whole scene here. So when we first meet her in this volume, she comes out as this really kick-ass character. We have a whole action scene with her. But right after that action scene, interestingly, her body changes. The perspective of her body changes. Her waist gets smaller and her boobs get bigger. So I thought, well, that's interesting. And so when we get to this spread, I was not expecting. So this is the moment where Blackjack is having a nightmare about a confrontation with Cobra, and Cobra's got his dad prisoner, and he wakes up out of the nightmare. And I'm looking down a little bit because I'm looking at the scene on my iPad here. And so we get the, I have to read a little bit of the narrative. So the chilled air, the soft linen, the scent of jasmine, which is so dissonant with him coming out of this nightmare, right? Sweat, bourbon. They tell Aaron he is alive. It's the drama. You've got to love the drama. The sting of his wound reminds him that he may live only a little while longer. I love this lead in, this melodramatic lead in coming out of the nightmare, the melodramatic lead in, and then we've got there is Miriam mysteriously not wearing a shirt, and she says, "You passed out. Red and I brought you here. We thought the poison had, here, let me." So she's beautiful. The thought creeps up on Aaron. So all of a sudden there's this focus on her as a, as an object, as a female object. And I, as a reader, am like, why does she no longer have a shirt on? How does her waist got so much smaller? But also from here on, I think maybe even before this, the depictions of her butt is very prominent. So at every scene, she's like, bam, bam, bam. Okay, but sure, why not? I'm buying the drama of it, but I can't stop wondering, why, where is her shirt? And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels in, the narrative box says, "Where's her shirt?" he wonders. Thank you. I feel so validated. Not just me, wondering too. There's a struggle going on. I love it. I love that moment where he's like, I don't know why she's not wearing a shirt. So I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. I'm there with you. You acknowledge my question. Now we can move on. I love it. I just really love it. So I also think that there's a lot of really cool geometry going on in this spread, starting with this partial circle here in the corner, and then the long panel at the bottom. I really liked all of that. But once my question was validated, I was all in. So that's why I chose this one.
Anyone want to follow up on Teresa's analysis?
Yeah, because I think that's one of those cool things about the genre that this kind of follows in terms of being a pulp piece.
Yeah.
There were story tropes that were, very common, but at the same time, like, not to spoil this for everybody because y'all should read it. We have those almost metatextual commentaries about it, and then the absolute, subversion from it. Because obviously, the idea when you read this, you're like, oh, they're gonna hook up on the next page. Psych! Like, that's not the way this story plays, and that becomes part of that setup knockdown of, no, this isn't what you think it is, and it really perfectly adds to something I think that you don't normally see outside of certain movie tropes. Here you have the hero, he almost lost, for all intents and purposes, and this is like book 2 that we're getting into and kind of opening up on. So there's a lot of cool things that Alex and company, they set up the norm and then go, nope, that's not what we're doing.
I tell you what, you guys are blowing my mind here because Alex is using the tropes you just mentioned. And in the very middle of the frame, it's the two faces looking out. Hey, where's your shirt? It's almost a fourth wall, right?
Yeah.
And then Alex drags you to that point where you're asking yourself, hey, what? And then even after that, you're still asking, what? How are they together? What's their vibe? And leaving that open is a rather adult theme. And I appreciate that you were able to keep that adult, what I'll call tension, running through the entire stuff, because it's none of our damn business what they're doing.
And there's also this thing where like the dialogue doesn't matter as much as the narration does, because in that next panel you get, she is beautiful, and the close-up, right? So like, rawr. I'm like, oh, okay. Oh, now back to the dialogue in that. Oh yeah, we're in a story. What was happening? I don't know. She's not wearing a shirt. Who knows? Kapow.
Anybody else want to comment on Teresa's panel? All right, then we'll go ahead and move on to Stanford's.
Oh,
This was a good one.
So yeah, I loved the action, but for this I wasn't drawn to the action so much as this moment. What I really like about this scene is that you've got Blackjack, you got Aaron sitting there thinking, and and it's, to me, what struck me is he's thinking back to his father, and he's thinking back to a family moment. And what I love here is that, when we think of this genre, when we think of the genre of the adventurer, first of all, adventurers don't have families in a lot of in most of these stories, right? Conveniently, mom and dad have passed away. If they have a brother, the brother's dead. They just don't have family. I love that Blackjack is always has family kind of in the background. So Aaron's thinking back, and Aaron actually moved to the world with family. He's got his sister. He's got, he still has some family. But his father, even though he was much more militaristic, he brings his family with him.
That's right.
And that really resonated with me. It made me think of like when I was a kid and we moved a lot. And I remember, every time we moved, it would be this moment where the family would like move into a hotel while we're waiting for our house or our apartment to be ready, right? But it was this idea that you move with your father. And I love that was captured here. I love that the family moved with the father. I found the conversation is also interesting. I mean, you can't see it up there. I'll read it to you. But Aaron's mother says to the father, he says, "But why here, Matthew?" And he says, "There's money here, that's why." And she said, "But these people are fighting to save their lands, their history." And his father responds, "Then they're going to lose. And I can't be too concerned about that. It is what I do." What I love about that is that there's even as we kind of see this moment where he's bringing his family with him, it acknowledges the harshness of what he does. And it actually provides a really interesting contrast, right? How he brings and protects his family even as he's put in conflict with other people's families. And I think that I love the way that captures, some of the interesting contrasts that we live in our everyday lives, because we rarely live ideologically consistent or ethically consistent lives. It's, we try to remember the beauty, but ultimately lives are kind of ugly and awkward. And so yeah, that's what I love. That's what I loved about this.
thank you.
That was a really
Anyone
good
want to
choice.
follow up?
I have two questions, actually. Both Teresa and Stanford both have said that the pronunciation is Aaron Day, and that's not how I read it. So I definitely want to hear from you, Alex. Is that correct? Is it Aaron?
Aaron, yes.
Okay. Because it was the double R, I took it as Aaron. And I was like, because his dad is like some sort of, worldly guy. And he's like, nah, it's not Aaron. You're not Aaron. You get art. Like it's something specific that is that is. So the fact that it's
in
Eric,
in the
that's pretty
second
dope.
graphic novel, there's a moment where a government official makes a remark about the spelling of Blackjack's name, and he points it out. No, my father wasn't ignorant. He spelled it that way because he wanted me to be as straight as an arrow, and that was where that came from.
There you go.
Yeah. So and family. Thank you, Stanford, for picking up on that in particular. Family, I think, meant a lot to me growing up because my father wasn't in the picture at all, and it was my mom, my grandmother, and my grandfather. And I lived with my mom, but we would go visit my grandparents on certain weekends. And I can remember my grandfather, who was West Indian, and he would sit down and he would put vinegar on his chicken, and he would hardly say anything for like 20 minutes, and he'd throw up this dry joke. And, everybody, did you just make a joke? And then, then we'd get it, we laugh, and he's right back to mellow again. It was so, the things that I didn't have, I looked for as a kid, and I saw my other friends had it, but I didn't. So I felt that, but I also treasured the moments that I did have. And I think one of the reasons, Teresa, I'll mention that her being, without a shirt was an artistic choice by the illustrator more than by me. But I let it go at the time, and I don't really regret it except in a certain way. But I knew that the women in my stories were not going to be damsels in distress, and were not going to be pathetic, and we're not going to, as I saw in an old serial, one of them gets pushed against a pillow and gets knocked out. They were going to be formidable because the women in my life growing up were formidable. And so family and representation on a number of levels was very important to me when I was creating this series. So again, thank you both for pointing out those things, and thank you, Stanford, for locking in on that.
Excellent.
Well,
Go ahead, Stanford.
I was going to say, it's interesting because, you and I had a lot of conversations about Blackjack very early on when you created him, and I was also thinking like when, sorry, Victor, but I cheated. I had Alex tell me that it was Aaron a long time ago, so I can't front like I did it right at all.
The backstory.
Yo, I appreciate you being honest about it, because you could have just kept that to the grave, and I just wouldn't even know. And I was like, and he just figured that out, man. I don't even know how he did that. That's why he's a doctor and I'm not. Right there.
But yeah, that is actually one of the things I really appreciate about your writing is that it's those little things, right? And it's not just transgressive of the pulp genre, it's also transgressive of the genre of comics, because superheroes tend not to have families as well. It's a weakness, it's a burden, it's what do we do with them? And I feel like you answered the question. Yeah, that's what you do with them. You bring them along.
Yeah, you make them a part of the picture because that's what they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Excellent. I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and share my favorite frame. What I really like about this frame is the top half is nothing but Blackjack expressing calm, cool power and authority. He's the dominant size figure in the image, yet the conversation, there seems to be a conversation going on in the hall. And what the frame and the way it's constructed forces you to do is begin in the upper left, good evening, detective, welcome to my new home. Then you have to follow the things to figure out exactly who's thinking. So your eyes are taken over to the right side of the frame. And then you go back to the left side of the frame and you read what the detective says. And then you recognize that the detective is trying to look back at him because he didn't know he was in the room. And what I love about that is all the work I have to do to eventually make that scene work. I suspect it was all done on purpose. So I first see this calm, cool power. Then I see in the left, it's kind of reddish, right? As if there's some kind of anxiety or some little tension. And then I go back and forth between those spaces. And ultimately it ends with calm, cool power. And as we go down from the top half to the next panel, we can see the two of them in the same frame split. And then we go back and forth to distinct perspectives in the bottom two. So it goes from this very, what I would say, kind of holistic power issue going on in that top frame, both visually and textually, making us look back and forth, down to the bottom where they've kind of divided, the frames now divide between the two of them. And you clearly come to understand who the two characters are and where the power truly lies. I just thought that was an accomplishment, and well done.
Again, thank you on my behalf and on the illustrator's behalf as well. It was, I think very cinematically, you know, and you know, like I teach film screenwriting, and from my normal natural love of film, of movies, of television, I know that both of those mediums are mediums where there's visual storytelling, and oh yes, there are words too. And so it's really about how much can you show, and how can you play with movement and direct eyes and all of that visually, and then not jam in words that completely obscure the visuals. So it's a test, and this was, you know, this was a big one for me because I'd lived with the Blackjack story in my head for several years before I eventually was in this position to be able to make it, you know, make it come to life. And there were rewrites. You know, there was no, I can't do that. Okay, I don't need those words. And you know, there was a lot of editing down, but I'm glad it worked out in the end. And I was very pleased with a lot of the work in that book.
This is also the first, if I recall correctly, the first scene in New York, right?
Yes.
So that brings a very sort of noir feel to it, that very detective noir. And I found myself, my reading voice in my head started to get that sort of like, yeah, it was the 1930s. I mean, it was like that it just automatically kicked in. And then with this whole the overcoat that the guy is wearing, and the, you know, the language, and of course some of the racist language that he's using, all adds to this noir feel throughout, such that by the time that when I was at the end of the section, I was like, oh wait, we started somewhere else, but I was so immersed in this this functionality of this section, and I really enjoyed that part. I enjoyed the sort of musicality of it throughout, and I was like, oh, I was not expecting that in this particular piece at all, and so I really appreciated bringing that in.
Thank you.
Alex, I'm really intrigued by the point you made about thinking cinematically, because before I was a psychologist, I was a film buff, and I've always sort of brought that with me. And some of my interests now in psychology and storytelling is the different devices that are used to evoke emotions, right? So all of these pages that we've been shown use really provocative, engaging camera angles, for lack of a better description. And I know that artists and writers work differently as they develop these things. Can you tell us a little bit about when you work with your artists cinematically, like how much direction do you provide? Do you sketch out storyboards, anything like that?
Yeah, I try, especially with artists that I trust, and from almost the first 2 or 3 pages that I saw from Joe, I went, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. So I try to remember what my role is. As a screenwriter for film or television, your job is to create the story and to bring the characters to life. It is not to be the cinematographer. It is not to dictate specific props and set designs and all that, unless those particular details are absolutely integral to that moment in the story. Otherwise, you have to give some freedom to the people who do their A job just as well as you do yours. So I would see, like, that opening sequence that Victor liked, I saw it in my head and I heard the words in my head and I wrote this thing, and then I had to pare it down a few times. And I think what I did for Joe, if one of these days I must go back and look at the original script, but I know that I indicated that we were moving across the sands, and I know that I indicated that we were seeing the battle in the distance and moving in. But he laid it out, and it was his design of the landscape and the silhouette that Teresa liked. And those were things that came from his imagination. And the other thing I'll say about him is there were a couple of times where, because he was in Brazil, and this is pre-scanning and digital sending of pages. So I'd get a FedEx box with the pages in it, most recent pages. And I would look at them. And there was a couple of times where I saw, oh, there's this little thing in this particular panel, maybe if he could just some white out there. So I would make a note and send it back to him. And within a matter of a week or so, I'd get a completely new page. He had redrawn the entire page. And I had said to his agent, because Joe at the time only spoke Portuguese, I said, no, I don't need the whole page. Just fix this thing. But Joe would get it and he'd look at it and he would say, I can do better. And that was it. And so he kept bringing his energy and his enthusiasm to the project, and it matched my enthusiasm. And I would sit sometimes, like I had to pick my kids up on something, I'd sit in the car staring at these pages and just get lost in it. And it's like for a second or so, every now and then, I'd forget I wrote this. So it's really, if you're fortunate, whether you're doing film, television, or comics, if you're fortunate to be teamed up with good people, oh man, the stuff that can happen. If you're teamed up with somebody who's, I don't know, picking their nose while they're drawing, then I think your best effort is have a good editor in play, or be very clear about what you need in your book and indicate those details, and then hope for the best. But I can honestly say all the artists I've worked with one exception, were phenomenal. Just really great people, and they brought so much to every experience.
That's fantastic. Anyone else want to follow up?
If I could jump in on that one, on this particular page, there's a lot of characterization at play that's very interesting. It really kind of establishes for us as newcomers to Blackjack what type of man he is. And obviously you can see it in the visuals where he's sitting and the detective is standing over him, which, obviously is a stipulation or a suggestion of power from the detective over him. But through the dialogue and the way that he plays it, demeanor-wise, you clearly see who actually has the power here. And one of the things that I think is really great is the undertones of continuity that you've established with their conversation. That there are things that happened before this that clearly is just a seed to continue, your interest in the overarching world of Blackjack. And because this is my first foray into Blackjack, I'm a new fan, so I'm going to continue reading. I'm curious, is that something that does pick up in other installments, or was this just kind of a moment and there's room for it to be mentioned in some other Blackjack works, or was this all part of a almost trilogy-like setup?
You're fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you feel about the series, to be talking to a kid who had worlds upon worlds going on in his head, even when I was 10 years old. When I started working on this series, I created his universe. I know what happened to his family, his parents before they were 25. He has a sister who's a year older than him, and I knew stuff about her that I didn't get to express for years in any of the stories. How he gets this house, he lives in a brownstone in the Upper West Side in the 70s. How he gets this house is definitely a story. And it's a story inspired by a story that's been adapted multiple times, but it's The Deadliest Game, And so I have my variation on it, which is one of the reasons I've never written the story, because, there's been so many variations on that. I think I'll get to it, but I'll get to it when I know exactly what I want to do that's going to make that absolutely mine. But yeah, there's history galore. The second graphic novel, Blood and Honor, you learn things about Tim Chang, the servant, and stuff that Aaron didn't know, and that Tim Chang didn't even know certain things. So, but I knew them. So it's very much, you know, you can create a series and you can be focused on your hero and what he or she can do with their powers and stuff like that, and what villains they're going up against. Or you can create this world in which you know where the threads are, and you can look back in their lives and look forward in their lives, and all of that influences how they respond in the scene in front of you. And so that's pretty much the way I like to think. And that's when I teach my students, it's very much what I try and share with them, that unless your character is born when your film starts and dies when the film ends, there's a life before and they're going somewhere after, and you need to know some of both, because that's going to impact on what they do during that storytelling time.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
That's fantastic. So, Amelia, do you know if we have any questions?
We do not have any questions now, but I will
Okay.
encourage the participants to put any questions you want in the chat or in the Q&A, and all of the panelists will weigh in.
Fantastic. So what we'll do is, as people are coming up with their questions, we said this was a Black Panther Blackjack team up. So
which caused some interesting dialogue on online for a little while there.
Exactly.
Oh man, that's great. When is Marvel gonna do that? No, you don't understand.
Yeah, that cost me a whole afternoon figuring out what to do. But,
Scott, I will mention there is one question based on the prompt that has come into the chat, and that is, does Alex have any prose blackjack books available?
Oh, yes. There's a series of them. There's what we call the Rapid Reads, which was a four-book series that I actually co-wrote with my friend Chris Ryan. As Mike, he wrote one of them. He wrote a couple of them on his own. But there's 4 books there, and then there's Blackjack Shooters, which is a collection of short stories about the character, and there's 2 graphic novels, and one of them has a short story in it that has spot illustrations. So there's a plethora of blackjack material that's out there, both in prose. Oh, I'm sorry, and I forgot Blackjack Buried Secrets, which has 2 stories in it. One in which he tackles a Scottish family is supposedly being slaughtered by werewolves. Yeah, I like your eyebrows going up there, Victor. That's,
I gotta read that one.
yeah. And even in that one, you know, just going back to a little bit of what you were saying about, or what I was saying about knowing a character based on the questions that you put forth. During that story, Aaron is thinking about the fact that his mother was very religious and his father was not. And Aaron, never felt he had to make a decision about whether or not he believed he had faith in any higher power. And now he's in a situation where he may be dealing with the supernatural, and he has to question that. What do I believe? Because whatever I'm about to encounter may not be of this world. So, you know, I pull in family and family belief systems and things like that as the character is trying to find his footing in a particular story as well.
Fantastic. We have a question here. I do want to make sure we get to the Black Panther Blackjack mashup. Let's go ahead and do this question. And then when we're finished with this question, if any of the panelists want to try to draw connections between Blackjack and Black Panther, we'll do that. So the question is, when you hire your artists, do you have a series of questions you ask, like an interview process, or do you only view their creations?
I tend to look at the visuals first, because that's part of what I'm going to them for. But then I do definitely talk to them, because you want to have some sense of how they think and what's their work ethics. And I learned this somewhat the hard way, because back in the early days of this, there's a couple of artists I was introduced to who immediately said, well, okay, I'll draw your book, but I'm going to own all of the book. And, you know, because you only wrote the story. And I went, oh no, that's not how that works. And then there was another situation where I worked with an artist who signed an agreement to do the book and even got an advance, and then just started hacking. I mean, just really just after a while, it was just not turning in any kind of quality work. And the backup artist was now having to jump in there and try and save it. So through those experiences, I realized, it's like hiring anybody else. Yeah, I want to know what you're about. I don't want to just know you can draw. I want to know that you're going to hit deadlines. I want to know that your word is your bond, and if you're having trouble, you'll tell me. Certainly I've dropped the ball in some of the assignments I've had, and you got to fess up. You got to take responsibility for that. You don't start cursing people out and go whack on someone else. Like, oh, well, look, it's just a comic book. Or I got a better job. I got, DC's going to be paying me some mad money, so I'm going to put your book to the side. Yeah, no, I'm just going to take my book and I'll be going. No, I'll get to it. No, you won't get to it soon enough. So yeah, there are qualifications that you really need to establish with your artists so that there's an agreement, because even though you're creating art, this is a business. This is a business, and there are deadlines, there are expectations, there's money on the line, either coming out of pocket or you're hoping to make it. There are people, like in this other situation, there were there's an inker waiting, there's a colorist waiting. If the illustrator, if the penciler lags out the job and things start going wrong, we start missing our deadlines, then everybody else gets shortchanged. So yeah, you definitely have to have a criteria and a standard for who you work with and how well they do their job. And whether you're paying, large amounts of cash or, $20, a deal is a deal. And you got to try and, hold up to that as best you can.
Excellent. So does anyone want to do a riff on a Black Panther, Blackjack, compare the characters, storytelling?
Vanessa does.
Yeah, I'm waiting to hear from Vanessa.
I'm sorry, I was
reddish and everything.
I was in my therapist mode. I was just listening and doing the head nod, like inviting people to keep talking. One thing that I'm curious about, and to just sort of go back to a little bit of what Teresa was saying, my favorite panel in everything was whatever Miriam was in, because she was a boss. Okay, everything about her was fabulous. One thing though that I feel a little tension about is when given her backstory, when there was that part about, she almost got defiled by men. It's almost like I was waiting for that. Like I was waiting for her to have a traumatic backstory. Aaron has a traumatic backstory, and then we're thinking about, T'Challa. He has, like, trauma seems to always be sort of like this thing that propels these powerful characters to do what they do. And I'm wondering, like, as a therapist who, helps people with trauma, it's exhausting, first of all. Second of all, is there a way for us to have an equally powerful person without a traumatic backstory? You know what I'm saying? Because I feel like with Miriam, when I read that, I was like, damn, I'm not a creative. It's just, I didn't want that for her, because I think it was too, it was just too real. When you deal with trauma every single day, it's like, damn, Miriam, like I wanted you to not have to deal with that. But it also that's what made it, I think, authentic, because it was very real.
And that was absolutely my reality when I was processing that story in my head. I looked at the culture she was born into. I looked at what would be the motivations for her to push past all of that stuff, all of her cultural upbringing, the things she would have experienced, to then become this adventurer. It wouldn't have worked really unless she was pushed out. Because really, women, even today, but less so in the 30s, you stay covered up and you stay quiet. You had no say whatsoever. So there was no way, in terms of my exposure to the culture and the amount of work that research and work that I did on it, that young lady could have gone this route without her being shoved out into it. And so I did some reading and I thought, okay, that would be it. That would be justification. You stay home, you're going to die. So you got to go. You got to go and you got to make your way in a world that's not going to be kind.
Mm.
And I thought that, and there's some Mariam stories that are in notebooks. And there's a team up between Mariam and Aaron's sister and one other character that involves freeing enslaved women. So yeah, there's a ton of, I told you that world is it's big. It's big. So I feel you. I do. And this is gonna sound so wrong, but I'm so glad you had that reaction because that was really what I wanted it to be authentic.
I wanted so much more for her, and I wanted more of her. She was my favorite character by far. And for me, there was a little disappointment in some of the artistic treatment of her, but also I didn't get enough. I didn't get enough of her. So
Good.
I want to encourage you to, to develop that, the world of Marion, if we can call it that. I would be so there for that. But
There's a short story, by the way, that remind me at the end. I'll bring the title up. There's a short story that already exists of her.
Awesome. What was I going to say? I wanted not necessarily a different story, because I think that the like potential rape trauma kind of thing is very, very real and very common. But I wanted something else. I wanted some additional driving force, because she becomes kind of a guardian for Blackjack, right? Like she's looking out for him constantly. And for me, there was a little bit of a miss with her motivation for that part. I got the motivation for her to become an adventurer and for her to push back and all of that. But I'm like, how then does she become like his sort of guardian? I wasn't seeing that little gap there. Yeah.
It's through Silas, and her, she was his companion and his partner in crime, as you were on his adventure. And he got injured because he left her behind.
Yeah.
If he hadn't, either he might have gotten through it better or they both would have died. But either way, he didn't. And so once Silas says, look, Aaron, she's more than you think she is. She can work. Silas is like his uncle. It's basically, okay, based on me knowing you, I'll take her on. I still have reservations. And so that's a very thin bridge, but that's where it starts.
Yeah.
And again, I'm glad that you want more of her. My favorite scene in the whole book, it's going to sound really strange. I love the Blackjack stuff, really do. Trust me on that. But her escape from the castle is like my favorite scene in the book. I just love that scene. The escape from the castle leading right up to when she reconnects with Blackjack and the other fighters. That sequence was just, I want to see that on film so bad, So she's a powerful character in my head. And like I said, I've had a lot of plans for her. There's one story that Chris Ryan wrote that she's the lead character in, teamed up with Blackjack. There's these other stories that I have, at the ready. And it's very gratifying to know that whatever small amount of Marion that you received, it left you wanting more.
Yeah, I'm ready to teach a class on this character. I'm just telling you.
So speaking of Christopher Ryan, he has answered our Black Panther Blackjack mashup. He says Black Panther stands for his kingdom. Blackjack stands up to kingdoms. Is that a juxtaposition that we can discuss, or?
Yeah, let's talk, because I would immediately say that Blackjack would have been the bane of existence for T'Chaka. Say if Blackjack was hired to get a piece of vibranium or infiltrate Wakanda, Blackjack would have been about doing just that job. That's what I'm paid to do. That's what I'm here for. I'm going to try to do it. And the problem for T'Chaka would be, here is a guy that, for all intents and purposes, should be a child of Wakanda. The way he moves, his determination. He should be one of us, but he's not one of us. And almost in the same way that we saw in the Black Panther movie of the the move towards treating Killmonger that way because he is an outcast. I think T'Chaka would have had the exact same reaction to Blackjack, which only would have fueled T'Challa's interest in who this guy is and really wanting to explore the world outside of Wakanda, because if this is what is out there, what can I learn? What can I be in conjunction to that?
Wow. I have to talk to Marvel about that one.
Is that a mic drop, or does someone want to follow up on Victor? Wow.
Just that I really want to hear. I really want to hear more of the story that's being collectively written.
There you go.
It's awesome.
I was
Go ahead, Stanford.
I was thinking that in some ways Blackjack and T'Challa are very similar characters, right? If you look at their relationships to their fathers, you look at the ways in which they are following in their father's footsteps, but trying to be better at the same time. If you look at what Aaron does, right? He's a soldier. His father's a soldier, is truly a mercenary, right? Whereas, for lack of a better term, Aaron is more of a soldier of fortune. And there's a slight difference there, right? In terms of who you work for, right? Aaron has a little more of, he is able to get his jobs to conform more to his ethical compass. In the same way that T'Challa is able to get being king of Wakanda conform more to his ethical compass. And I find that to be one thing that just strikes me. Like I said, it's very interesting about these characters because and they both embody a particular kind of Black excellence, and they're very much built around respectability politics, and I mean that in the best of ways. And in fact, I was recently talking with someone about Black Panther and what when I think he works and when I think he doesn't. And I feel like the storylines where they move away from him being enmeshed in respectability politics, enmeshed in debates about exceptionalism, he falls flat. And I could say the same thing about Blackjack. What makes Blackjack work is that it's what you said earlier. It's built in the character that he doesn't swear. It's built into the character that he has a certain kind of moral compass, right? And even when I look at his home, right? He's in New York. It's like what bothers the detective about Aaron is that he's too respectable. He has a nice house. He dresses well. He talks well, right? He can't have that in his world, right? It's okay to have a Black man there as long as he's not respectable, and it's very clear in the writing. But yeah, so that's what I think of when I think of the matchup.
Wow, cool, very cool.
Well, what I like about what you just said, Stanford, is it shows, you sort of identify the two characters being very similar, but existing in different contexts. And, if we go back to the What If series, what if T'Challa were Star-Lord, and we saw T'Challa in a completely different context, being the same person, but having the opportunity to express different ways of being, because he wasn't burdened with being a prince. There was a lot more joy expressed in who he was at that point because he didn't have that mantle of responsibility. So I like this idea of a very similar character sort of expressing different aspects of who he or she is, as a function of the context they've grown in and the context they find themselves in. I just thought of that when you were saying the two were very similar.
I think what's interesting about what you said, Scott, about the mantle of responsibility, I think and this is specifically for just African-American people, there's a mantle of responsibility just being a Black person. Like, I don't want to fit into this stereotype. I don't want to do this. And so even to what Stanford said, like, Aaron lives in a house and he speaks a certain way, because if you don't, there's all of this stuff that people automatically think about you. Like if he was, talking real jive or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like he would be received in a different way. He shouldn't be, but he would, like why is one thing valued over the other? And so I think that and it's the same way I feel about Killmonger. There is a mantle of responsibility being a Black man in America that you can't shake no matter what you do. And so I think that it's interesting, but that's the juxtaposition between Black people in America and Black people elsewhere. You know what I'm saying? I think the responsibility is different. So even thinking about T'Challa, like he has a responsibility because he has a whole kingdom. In America, the responsibility that you have is very different, and it's very unfair, for lack of a better word, you know what I'm saying? And so I think thinking about what it means to be Black across the diaspora, I think for these different characters is also just something interesting to think about when you compare them. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely know what you're saying.
Absolutely.
It's funny. When I first started publishing Blackjack and going to Comic Cons, I can remember two very specific incidents. One happened in Ohio. The other one, I believe, was in San Diego. But I had the Blackjack comic books on the table, and there was a little blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy, maybe like 11 or so, came up to the table, and it was the first two issues. And he looked at them, and I said, "Hey, feel free, open, take a look, look at the pictures and everything." And he looked at him, and he turned the pages very carefully, and he said, I'm going to walk around and look some more at some other things." I said, "Fine, nice talking to you." And off he went. About an hour later, he comes back around, lays his money down, and buys both issues. And there was a guy sitting next to me, goes, why did that boy buy that book? And I said, because he was interested in it. And you could tell the guy was like, he couldn't wrap his head around why that little blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy would want to buy a book about this Black character, right? Seconds later, from halfway down the aisle, there's this guy's like 6'2" or something like that, biker dressed. I mean, with the denim thing, the chains and the boots, and he goes, You, it's him. And I'm thinking, I'm gonna die in Ohio. This guy's gonna come over the table, he's gonna beat me down with a chain. Okay, I gotta go out fighting, right? He comes up to the table. You got the second issue here. I'm thinking, yeah, I do. Where did you get this? I said, well, I wrote it. He wrote it. My comic book guy sold me the first one, and I couldn't find the second issue. Just can I buy this one? I said, yeah, you can buy it. Just calm down. And once again, it's like people are telling you this is only going to sell in Watts and Harlem and Bed-Stuy. And then you go out into the world and you meet folks and they're going, hey, I want this. For whatever reason, it connects. There's something about it resonates with them. There's a father, a Black man in Philadelphia, who came up to me and told me that he had bought the books some years before, and he had wound up reading them with his daughter as she was growing up. And she was now in the military and over in the Middle East. And she'd been gone several months, and he was, bummed out and worried about her, because she's in the military in the Middle East, right? And he decided he was going to read some comics and chill out. And he went looking for his Blackjack, and he couldn't find it. He thought, oh, we moved a couple of times. I must have lost it. Damn, blah, blah, blah. And he has a conversation with his daughter at one point, and he says, by the way, I was looking for these comics, and she says, oh, Dad, I've got them. He said, you've got them? She said, yeah, I brought them with me. I said, why would you do that? She said, because it made me feel like we were still together when I read them. And once again, it's like, I don't know what's going to happen when I put the books out there. And like my friend Don McGregor says, you can only try to write the best story you possibly can. And then you send it out there and you can hope that it resonates with an audience. You can do that. And then if you're really fortunate and you're blessed, you eventually get to meet the people who say, yeah, it worked. And I've been that fortunate. I've been that fortunate. And I hope to continue to be for some time to come.
No,
And I mentioned Don McGregor, who wrote the Black Panther. So there's a mashup there
there's
too,
a
right?
mashup there as well.
Yeah.
You know, there is something very important to address about that misunderstanding of Blackjack's place and acceptability of sorts. You know, obviously in reading this, I had immediate Indiana Jones vibes, but not derivative takes, right? This is not a exploitational version of Indiana Jones. And it's really important to look at things in this wide range to say Doc Samson is not Indiana Jones, is not Drake Uncharted, right? These are all characters that follow the same sort of tropes and archetypes of who they are. And Blackjack fits right inside of that by still being something unique and different and fun. And if all of those things can exist and have for decades, why wouldn't Blackjack be just as open to anyone else? Did I run around pretending like I was Dr. Jones? Absolutely. Can I see little kids run around believing that they're Blackjack? Without question. So,
And did we see kids running around pretending to be the Black Panther? Yep.
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
We just talked about this, right? Like there's nothing that brings me joy more, I kid you not, than going to a Comic-Con and seeing a kid run around in Black Panther costume, take it off and look nothing like T'Challa, okay? A child of Wakanda, they are not, but they are a child of Wakanda because they want to be. That's that beauty part of, you know, creating this thing that is open for everybody. And anyone that's listening, I definitely have to put that out there. If you like any of these things, put Blackjack right in the center of it because you will like it too.
I want to piggyback on this and say that to both what Victor and Alex are saying, you know, in terms of narrative creation and as an educator, what I always am looking for because I'm always looking for books to teach, right? This is what I do now. Most of my texts are comics, and I'm very fortunate to be in a situation where I can do that, where I can teach comics. And what I'm looking for is, yes, representation, great, but I teach more than just, you know, Latino comics or African American comics or whatever. I'm looking for meat on the bone. I'm looking for stories that we are going to be able to really get into, that have some real meat, some meaty business. Sorry for you vegetarians out there, but it's good for you as well. Because
some real soy content right now.
Yes, the fake meat, whatever it is, but there's meat nonetheless of whatever sort it is. But for me, it means that there's so much there to discuss, to debate, to agree and disagree, and to connect with, so that we somehow start telling stories of our own growing up, of our own childhood, our own journeys, because we're reading these pieces that we're like, oh man, you know, that reminds me of my dad, that reminds me of this thing, that reminds me of this trauma in my life, whatever it is. And when I can find something that gets me thinking, me excited about teaching it, but also my students connecting in a way where they're like, oh man, I hadn't thought about, you know, like T'Challa has this thing going on. There's this constant struggle with like authority and parents, and the struggle for with siblings and all of that sort of thing. It's just like my family. I'm like, yes, yes. And so I really appreciate that that you both brought this up, because to me, that's what makes comics, good comics, right? Good comics, so exciting to read and to teach and to really, really delve deeply into.
Yeah, I really like the the story you told, Alex. The Marine Brit in the comments writes, "Oh, what a great story! It makes me feel like we're still together. I'm not crying, you're crying." And one of the reasons I'd read that is your story about the struggles it took to bring this story to the world. Data clearly indicate that when people watch someone from their in-group, whatever dimension we're talking about, actually empathizing with someone from their out-group, it changes the way they feel. It actually can change the way they experience outgroups and over time change what their outgroup is. So the very act of creation, the very act of you being at a con interacting with this young boy, everybody's watching and they may be seeing things that they haven't seen before, but that's exactly the point. As they see these things they haven't seen before, it actually changes what they think they should be seeing the next time, right? And the beauty of it is it's not a conscious deliberation. You don't think, oh, I didn't see that before, I'm going to see that more now. You actually just see it more and more and more. And suddenly it comes to be what you expect. You know, so one of the subtitle of ReggieCon is What's Your Story? And this is the entire point, right? Tell each other about our lived lives. We empathize, push back, we behave like sophisticated adults together, and the world sees that. And that's in and of itself a goal, and very much what I find myself about these days is.
Can I? You said stories, and it just reminded me of one more thing. I'll try and be very concise.
You're good. Go ahead.
I got to tour Russia. I'm just going to call it. A few years ago, I was invited there for a major Comic-Con, and in Moscow, and I presented there, and it was a big series of art displays of a number of the books I'd worked on and a number of other things. It was really great. And I got invited to go back and to tour 5 cities and to speak at colleges and high schools and community centers and at a museum. And I was in one particular library, and there was it was 2 classes of high school students. This, again, all Russian students, right? Boys and girls. And I got them to draw and create their own character and did some, some lettering and stuff like that. And so they had a takeaway. And afterwards, I did a Q&A with them. And one of the young ladies stood up at a certain point and said, she wanted to know if I thought that the rest of the world even cared about their stories. Would anybody even be willing to read them outside of Russia? And I said, most of my life, and I pointed to my beard, which was less gray then, but what the heck. I said, as you can tell, I've been around longer than most of you here. And in my entire life, 95% of the things I've been told or heard about Russia came from non-Russians. So don't you think it's time that people like me got to hear your story from you? And you could see the expression on the kids' faces as they were wrapping their head around that idea that, yes, there's a doorway that you can come through with your story. And I'm standing there thinking, at some point, someone said that to a bunch of Black folks. And now here's this Black folk saying that to a bunch of Russian kids. And so telling of story is a telling of story is a telling of story. And everybody grows and benefits from learning that we have more stories to tell, no matter where you come from.
This reminds me, Alex, of I have a good friend who is currently incarcerated and has been so for about a year. And I've been sending lots of reading material and also homework. He's like, you're always sending me homework, man. I'm like, I know, I'm anticipating for when you get out. You're going to be writing a lot. But one of the things I've been sending are comics. And I never thought that sending comics would start like a whole library. And so when he was at the county, it was really easy to send the comics. And he's like, yeah, man, I just finished this. And then so-and-so's borrowing it. And then so-and-so's borrowing it. The comics are huge because they're small. They can roll them up. They can they're very portable and all of that. But also because it just opens up so many different kinds of worlds. Because I've sent him a lot of the superhero ones and sort of random things, but also memoir comics and things like that. And they're just like, wait, these are people writing about like lives that make sense beyond the fantastic. And I'm like, yeah, man, comics are about everything, right? And they're like, I wonder if I could write a comic. And I'm like, yeah, yes, please do. So I think that what you're saying speaks exactly to this sort of thing.
Absolutely. I've had the good fortune of networking kids from different countries together on comic book projects. And it's like a pen pal effect. They get to talk to each other about comics, but also about other stuff, and realize, gee, you're a kid like me. Gee. So whatever the politics are, and I always say, like, people over politics, comics over chaos, that's whatever the politics are. Bottom line, there's people, there's regular people out there, and they have stories to tell.
So we have 2 lingering questions in the chat. Amelia, would you go ahead and read those?
I sure can. The first one is from Carla, and Carla asks, are there any more stories about his sister Mary coming out?
Yeah, it's funny. I didn't even mention Boo Hiss. Thank you, Carla, for jarring my memory. I did a quick anthology a couple of years ago, just before the pandemic, called The Day Chronicles. And it's a collection of stories about Mary, his sister. And the quick story there behind that is that when I first created Blackjack and I was working on the first story, the second bite of the cobra and all that, I had already established his sister and I knew what her relationship was to him. And when they came back from living in Europe after their parents died, they were in their early 20s, she goes to live in the South. He stays in New York. She goes to live. And I remember thinking, why is this worldly exposed young black woman choosing to live in the American South or Southwest in the 1930s? What the heck am I thinking? I could not come up with an answer, but something kept saying, this is the right move. This is where she goes. You got to just do this. And so for years, I would make references to her in some of the stories. She'd write letters to him. He'd comment on her. I had a bunch of plots that would involve her popping in and out of stories, but I still couldn't answer that question. What the heck is she? Why did I put her there? And then, like I said, like 2019, I decided to write some of these short stories I had in my head. And as I was writing the second one, I went, oh, of course. Absolutely makes perfect sense. Aaron fights his battles on a global scale. Mary's fights are on the home front. And if you're going to have the kind of stuff that was going on and affecting people of color at that time in that arena, a number of them would have been conditioned to just, we got to put up with this, or our kids go missing, and yeah, I want my baby back, but nobody's going to back us up and everything. Mary's going to go, I got some skills. And she's going to feel compelled to do something about it, but she's also going to be smart about how she does it. So it's like she becomes that quiet force that moves through that arena in a certain way that some of the others might not be able to. And so I wrote several short stories about her, and it's called The Day Chronicles. It's available through Amazon. So yes, there will be more stories about her. Again, I've got a list of stories I haven't gotten to. Some of them will involve Mary solo, and some will involve Mary teaming up with some of the other women in Blackjack's world.
Fantastic. I think there's one more question.
One more question, and it's kind of maybe an appropriate one to end on. Noel, or Noel, if you're me. Noel asks, do you have an end game for Blackjack when you feel it would be time to wrap him up?
No. I'll put it to you this way, Noel. I created another project called Blackjack Legacy, and it's several generations after him. It's present day. So I know what his family lineage is right up to this day. Even within that, I never acknowledge that he dies. I just don't. And so maybe he is dead. Maybe he's living some phenomenally old man somewhere life, and I don't end him. And there's threads that he's developed throughout the decades that's very much almost like the shadow in a way. There are things that he's put in place that are still functioning, and that his legacy is able to tap into to do some good. So I just feel like it's the thing of legends, and that's sort of the way I feel about him. He's my personal legend.
Well, We're getting close to closing time. What I want to do this evening is ask all the guests if they'd be interested in sharing where people can find them on social media.
Wow.
If you decide you don't want to, that's perfectly fine. And I'm going to start with Victor.
As you guys know by now, you can find me at Vantage In-House on all forms of social media. You can also find me at You Create Comics, letter U, CRE, the number 8 comics on both Twitter as well as Instagram, where I'm putting a lot more content out for some of the different projects that we're doing to help you make your own comic creations from start to finish.
Fantastic. How about you, Stanford?
You can find me also under the same handle. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, and TikTok at SW Carpenter.
Excellent. How about you, Eric?
You can find more information about me on the Department of Psychology at Illinois State University's webpage. You can find me on Twitter at Eric Wesselman, and you can find some of my film musings if you Google normal theater, film culture.
Excellent. And how about you, Vanessa?
Yay!
You can find me on all forms of social media at Dr. Vanessa Hintz.
Excellent. Teresa?
Yes, you can find me at Doc Tero, DocTeeroh, mostly on Instagram, but I would love for folks to follow the Latinx Comic Arts Fest on Instagram. And I shared the link to the YouTube page where we have all of our recorded content, and then also our website, which is going to have lots of fun stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Excellent. And last but not least, Mr. Alex Simmons, where can people find you on social media?
I'm usually hanging out somewhere. You can find me either on the website or Facebook at simmonshereandnow.com. On Instagram, I'm Simmons_Alexander, as well as a separate account, Blackjack Day for Night, Blackjack Adventures Day Blackjack Day to Night. There we go on Instagram. Also, I have a podcast that I do with my buddy Chris Ryan called Tell the Damn Story, and you can find that on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and a few others. And I also have the Kids Comic Con website, kidscomiccon.com website. So there's several places you can find me. I'm usually doing something fun.
That's fantastic. You can find me on Twitter. Oh, go ahead, Teresa. I'm sorry.
I was just saying thanks for your work. I just love your work. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We will talk more.
There you go. Well, you can find me on Twitter at dark_loops, and you can find all videos of all the ReggieCon panels we've done so far. If you just type ReggieCon, all one word, into the Google machine, it'll take you directly to our page, and you just simply find previous panels and you find us there. So it's about 8:30, and unfortunately it's time to bring this fantastic celebration of Black History Month to a close. Please join us next month on March 24th as we discuss Jessica Jones' Alias as a celebration of Women's History Month. Thanks to all of you for attending. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes for making us look like we know what we're doing. Thanks so much to our guest, Dr. Vanessa Hintz, Dr. Stanford Carpenter, and of course, the one, the only Mr. Alex Simmons.
Thank you for everything too. Thank you very much. It was really a great pleasure. Thank you, all of you. Really, 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 thank you.
Excellent. Well, happy Black History Month. Have a great evening. Good night.
Good night.